feels so good. What's up, people? We're back. Chris, we're talking about Trial of the Chicago 7 here.
Yes, we are. And
we actually got
a lot to talk about.
We actually got a big movie this past weekend, which I was kind of shocked at. But also, we're in October and it's Oscar season. And it's funny because the movies this season are kind of like sneaking up on us. They're putting out like those little festival notices where you can pay like $15 to watch festival movies, which is amazing. And I've already taken advantage of it twice now. I'm watching another festival movie in 2 days. So I would highly recommend that as far as that goes. Not this movie, however. This movie went directly to Netflix. It's funny because this movie was originally supposed to be released in theaters. It was going to be a Paramount release. They were going to go full in on an Oscar campaign on this. Aaron Sorkin is directing this movie after having been trying to get this movie made for about a couple of decades now. He even approached Steven Spielberg at one point to direct it. And now he has brought it to the big screen, people. This movie has a tremendous cast, probably the biggest cast of the year. We're talking Sacha Baron Cohen, Jeremy Strong, Eddie Redmayne, Alex Sharp, Mark Rylance, Frank Langella, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Michael Keaton. The list goes on and on. There's so many people in this movie. It's ridiculous, but we're here. And so, Chris, before we get started, I just want to gauge your appeal here. How excited were you when you could actually say, hey, well, let's come over, let's shoot this video, and then we actually have a new movie to watch? Like, what was your excitement level there from like a 1 to 10 basis?
Yeah, well, first of all, you said to the big screen, and so is that you just humbly flexing the fact that you have a super big TV downstairs?
No, it was originally supposed to open in theaters, and then when everything got shut down, Netflix bought it.
No, I know. You missed my joke. You said it came to the big screen. I was just messing with you.
Oh,
but
okay.
When you came over to watch a new movie for the first time in a long time, excitement level 10, because A, Aaron Sorkin, B, Social Network, C equals amazing, and so everything else, I don't even care if it's like the craziest concept I've ever heard. It could be something that I hate. If he's directing it and he's writing about it, I'm going to at least go into it with an open mind.
Now, briefly describe your brief history with Aaron Sorkin's work.
It's just I'm very new to him. I've been the TV guy for a long time, and you put me on to a little film called The Social Network at the beginning of the year during the quarantine, and I'd have to look up his filmography right now. I believe that's all I've been exposed to.
You're lucky. Because I happen to have it right here. He has written since the 90s. He started out as a playwright. Funnily enough, I actually found out he graduated from Syracuse University, which is amazing. And he has written A Few Good Men, Malice, The American President, created 4 different TV shows, The West Wing, Studio 60 and the Sunset Strip, The Newsroom, and also Sports Night back in the early 2000s. He has also written Charlie Wilson's War, obviously our favorite movie of this decade, The Social Network, Moneyball, the criminally underrated Steve Jobs, and then made his directorial debut 3 years ago with Molly's Game, which was another one of those weird examples that seemed to have like a second life once it hit Netflix, because nobody saw that movie when it came out in theaters, which is a damn shame. This movie, however, sees Sorkin once again tackling something on a real world basis, something very politically charged. It's funny because if you look at his 90s run, it's pretty much, even though they're all political, they're all about fictional characters. Like you have,
sure.
Yeah, A Few Good Men, Malice, and American President. Those are all like fictionalized characters. But then everything post West Wing, he's focusing on real people. And it's almost like he sees himself as like one of the major scribes of the last like 60 years of American history. So that was just a funny thing that I noticed while going over his filmography. I'm like, wow, he's all about, that was an Owen Wilson. Wow. Just like only seems focused on like post 1950s big class world changers.
Yeah, so out of that list, the only other film I've seen, well, I guess now I've seen 3, A Few Good Men, long time ago though. With that was a film that the grandparents wanted to watch with me because they thoroughly enjoy it. It's what he strikes a chord with, I think, multi generations because of the fact that get
into that later.
Well, if you're open-minded, any generation can appreciate his work.
Well,
I think it's very fair and balanced. But so I think like it's one of those things that it's like his movies are not flashy, they're just super well written and super dynamic. So when I heard Aaron Sorkin new film, I knew nothing about the film. Dom had just told me, hey, there's this new Netflix film coming out, do you want to cover it? And I was like, well, who's attached to it? He said Aaron Sorkin. I'd only seen 2 things before. Social Network literally blew my mind at the beginning of this year, so I was like, okay, of course, it's a no-brainer at this point in my life. With the few things I've seen, he's already made that much of an impression on me where it's a no-brainer. If you say, hey, there's something new Aaron Sorkin coming out, do you want to check it out? I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. It's interesting because Sorkin's whole thing is that he's got He's the king of the monologue, obviously. He's the second most known guy behind Tarantino for having these gigantic, sprawling monologues that take like anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes each to deliver. And he manages to have them like every other minute in each one of his movies. And this is the latest example of that. So the movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7, is based, unfortunately, on a real trial which happened. Based off events that occurred in the summer of 1968, and then the trial itself was continued 1 year later into 1969, based on a trial which occurred when the incoming Richard Nixon administration decided to make a move to attempt to litigate anti-war, majorly left-wing hippie protesters, which also happened to include several Black Panther members. So in 1968, you got a bunch of these college like hippie types protesters going out to protest against the war, just in general. They are ambushed by the cops. 7 of them are arrested and proclaimed the Chicago 7. And this is the trial that chronicles that. And unfortunately, there was also a Black Panther member that was arrested as well. His name was Bobby Seale. And to kind of sum up that point, it basically continues Sorkin's continued eponymous to make these eponymous movies just about the little guy going up the system, failing, realizing that while they fail, they can at least remind the system of how it's failed the people. So that was the note that I kind of had to like summarize his body of work, I feel like, because that's kind of literally, I think, with the exception of Social Network. Well, I mean, Social Network is that just in a very, very negative way.
Yeah, I mean, in this way, I think it's still negative in the sense that it's unfortunate that the system has failed the people, aka how Bobby Seale throughout the entirety of the film and historically as well was, trying to let the judge know, hey, I don't have my representation here. I'm not being given a fair trial because I'm not a lawyer. I can't properly defend myself, and it just didn't seem to matter. And we'll get into all that later on. But it's funny how he takes what you just said and he can apply that sentiment to two completely different scenarios, but yet have them both make sense and be so impactful in the case of The Social Network and, of course, today, Trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah, so we've talked about Social Network a decent amount. So I just wanted to know, Chris, afterwards, like break it down for me. What is it that you thought about Trial of the Chicago 7?
Yeah, so after we watched the film, we pretty much barely said goodbye. We just had to leave, and because I had to get to work. And I was actually a little late to work because I was like, got to finish this in one shot. Like I knew an hour in, I was like, I don't care if I'm like 5 minutes late, which I was. No one really cares anyways. They love me there. Who doesn't love me? But
careful,
with that
dude.
being said, why you don't?
About what? Don't make this about me. You were going into a monologue there. Don't make this about me.
You said careful, and it was into me just making a joke about people loving me. I have friends, I have enemies. But in this case, I was at work and I had a lot of time to simmer and sit with this because it was that impactful where I didn't want to put on any music. I didn't want to put on a podcast. I just kind of wanted to think about what I had just watched. And to be honest with you, I thought it really struck a chord, and I was thinking about it all day. Like usually I put on music at work, any podcasts, anything to mitigate the monotony, just a little bit of the day-to-day, retail-esque kid job, if you'll have it. And I didn't need to do that because this movie gave me something to chew on all day.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, definitely, because I had a couple of thoughts about this movie, to say the least. While I, too, am a huge fan of Aaron Sorkin. I've watched a lot of stuff from him unintentionally. He was one of those guys that I kind of just ended up coming back to and then afterwards I would find out, I'd be like, oh, Aaron Sorkin wrote that movie. Cool. I didn't see Social Network until later. I think the first like major movie I saw with him was Moneyball. Weirdly enough, I still haven't seen A Few Good Men, even though I've seen the clip a million times. So like I know how it plays out. A lot of people have like their different preferences for Aaron Sorkin. Like I know a lot of diehard West Wing fans. West Wing is a really, really good show, but that's another show that kind of falls down in its later couple seasons. I watched all 3 seasons of The Newsroom. Apparently, I like that show more than like everyone else because like nobody else likes that show. And then I didn't watch any of his short-lived TV shows, but obviously the thing that he is most known for is The Social Network. But as far as this movie goes, so this is his sophomore effort, right? He's kind of in a long line of directors who just popped up this decade, and then they had their sophomore efforts a couple of years later. They didn't measure up as well. You've got, I think the only one that really measured up was The Lighthouse to the Witch, but you got Midsommar after Hereditary. You got Us after Get Out. And now you have this after Molly's Game, which I enjoyed very, very much. I know a lot of people thought that it was subpar compared to some of his other work, a little sloppy, kind of his upcoming as a director, because that was the first thing he directed.
Or Molly's Game?
Molly's Game.
Just to clarify. Molly's Game. Okay, that's what I thought you were saying.
Yeah. This movie, though. So he's done Molly's Game. he's got his shot. He's like, okay, I have a chance to make this my biggest movie yet. He's got the biggest cast that he's ever worked with. Every single person in this movie is hot in some capacity. Like, you've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt on a comeback run. You've got multiple TV stars who are up and coming and superstars. You've got a couple of veteran actors that are guaranteed to get some Oscar nominations. And you've got two leads that are frankly two very oddball actors who one ends up playing it straight. One ends up playing even more of an oddball than he usually does. Those two, of course, being Eddie Redmayne and Sacha Baron Cohen as Tom Hayden and Abbie Hoffman. And here are my thoughts on this movie. I enjoyed it a lot. Like a lot. I don't think there's a single Aaron Sorkin movie that I've seen that I don't like, even his subpar work. But again, that might just be my bias. I'm not sure. But I do think that this movie is cluttered as hell. There were a few moments where I'm like, even for Sorkin, I'm like, okay, this is pristine, but the way that this is shot is really confusing. And I'm having a hard time actually discerning what's going on. Possibly, and I can't believe I would ever actually say this about a movie, possibly would have worked better as a Netflix series. And that is the first time I've ever said anything. You put this as like a 6 or 7 episode miniseries, and I think this would be great. I really actually do. I still think you were smoking something when you said that about Jojo Rabbit. I'm like, there's no way that movie could have possibly been a miniseries. But this, I think, actually would have worked better as a miniseries. I think you would have gotten more time. I actually think that the characters were a little bit clustered at points. I really, really do. And they were kind of all fighting to talk, and they all got their equal amount of screen time. And it takes a master like Sorkin to mesh all of them together. But I'm just thinking, like, man, you get like an Abbie episode, you get a Jerry Rubin episode, you get a Kunstler episode. Oh my God, I can't believe that's his actual name. I have to point that out.
Yeah, that was something else. History sometimes does people favors, and that is one of the favors that history
like the most
given
immature thing I've ever said on this podcast.
When you said it in the film when we were hanging out watching
it's
it, I was like,
I'm sorry.
Damn, that really took me out of the moment, but I'm so glad he said it because it is hilarious.
There's an argument to be made that he's the best performance in this movie, which is insane considering that I'm talking about the same guy that stole Stallone's Oscar 5 years ago.
You could argue that.
No, it's the truth. I don't need to argue it.
I think there's a lot of good performances in this film. I agree with the majority of your
sentiments. I was about to get to that.
About the cluttered and whatnot. And I do think it's pretty interesting hearing you kind of like go for the Netflix of all outlets to create this miniseries. But you know what?
Yeah.
It could have served a good purpose in that regard, because here's the thing, like what I harken back to is our Contagion episode where we first met Movie Files, the faithful podcast where you guys both really enjoyed it for the writing and the screenplay aspect, but I enjoyed it more for the social comparison. I enjoyed it for that too,
just so you know.
And so that I kind of have like similar issues in regards to, that I had with Contagion in regards to this film, where I feel like they did such a great job sort of drawing the comparison. Like, just look at Portland, and it looked exactly like some of those scenes with the riots and stuff back in the 60s. Like, for example, like when they're at the end of the film and they're like, charge the hill, that whole scene, which is a great scene. You guys got to go and experience that for yourselves. But it takes so much time inside the courtroom that the rest of the film feels so underdeveloped. So what I got more so out of this film, and before we really dive in, because I'm not saying I don't like the characters, I think the characters work to an extent, but I agree with you in regards, because I think it was more so the message to me is what permeates and gives this maybe a higher grade than I would give it over the screenwriting aspect, if that makes sense. You know, like the actual storytelling, I think, was second in regards to like, well, this kind of got overshadowed because of Watergate coming out next year, and the Summer of Love and Woodstock and all these pop culture events that happened in 69, right? Being such a big year, that for this to take place in 68, got to kind of show that it was important, and especially what better time frame to do it in, unfortunately, with everything that's going on right now. But there is an opening for this to be relevant again. But I think in regards to the history and the social comparisons that you want to draw from 68 to 2020, I think I agree. Some of the writing did suffer a bit.
Yeah. Oh man, you're bringing up
the characters. The characters.
But here's the thing: you're bringing up a lot of points that like I got to answer all of them. So first off, you brought up the idea that like how this event kind of got overshadowed. It's funny because this event has actually been televised widely. There have been multiple things made about this event, yet I'd never heard of it. This is literally the first time I've ever heard of it. And then when I asked my family about it, they were like, "What?" They had no idea that this ever happened. They had no idea that this ever happened. And I'm like, dude, you had this like, I'm pretty sure, was that the same year that Martin Luther King was killed, or was that I may not be remembering that.
I think it was. I think they referenced it in the beginning of the film. I'll look it up real quick.
Yeah, I believe that it was. So that's the same year. So you have Martin Luther King that year. 1 year later, you got Manson with Sharon Tate. And so, and plus, and then Watergate, obviously. But it's funny because you mentioned the idea of relevancy, and the whole thing is like, I even made the original thumbnail. Yeah, 1968. So, and this was in the summer. So this was like a few months after that happened. So, what's it called? The thing is that, yes, you mentioned the message overall. And here's my thing, is that Sorkin's monologues, I think, lend themselves the most to this movie, because this movie is all about the youth kind of overtaking the next generation and showing like the next generation's attempts to hold them back. That was largely what I got from this movie, in addition to obviously just the obvious corruption of power and everything. Those are like the two most obvious themes on display here. But when it comes to what Sorkin is trying to say about this movie, here's my thing. And this is going to get a little metatextual, so bear with me here. Sorkin has this kind of weird hypocrisy with all of his work, where he is always making stuff about kind of the rebel who is actually able to affect change to an institution and can actually like make a difference, which usually rarely ever happens in real life. So he's optimistic, but he's also kind of a little optimistic, too optimistic for his own good, because he also kind of makes movies literally, like, let's face it, this was the okay boomer movie. Literally, that's what this is. And like, to a certain extent, like to the point where you literally put Frank Langella as like the most incompetent, borderline, like some form of like mental disease up there on the stand, and what is clearly, to me, the biggest farce trial since before OJ. And yeah, I'm going there, because this whole trial, I know there was a lot of like extra movie adage to it, but like the large amount, like the large kind of overall consensus for this trial is the fact that it is like one of the biggest jokes in history.
But before you keep going, I'm sorry, who did Frank Langella play? There's a lot of
Frank
names
Langella was the judge.
That's what I thought.
Judge
okay,
Hoffman.
Cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of characters.
About him.
It's a lot of characters, understandably. Literally, this is the biggest cast of the year. It's ridiculous. So, but basically, to sum up that point, I'm kind of trying to say that like Sorkin has a little bit of a hypocrisy where kind of in what he's trying to do with his movies, it almost makes them seem like too good to be true almost. And that kind of idea, that giddy optimism, can sometimes not exactly accomplish it, especially when, again, this is unfortunately a situation where despite its good intentions, a lot of the stuff real world today is still happening. Like the fact that you're seeing like that amount of like honestly police brutality in this movie, and the fact that that is kind of still going, but also like weirdly like it I don't know. I might be rambling here, but it's like it's a little bit too reminiscent, and I'm not sure if it's like trying to say the right thing, despite its overall intentions.
So here's what I'm getting from what you just said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just trying to make heads or tails of what you're saying. I think I get it. So even though we see what happens to our characters, right? They end up going to prison. They do get their point across. Yes. And so it's kind of like a pessimistic optimist in a sense, where it's like, hey, we're going to pay the price, but what we were paying the price for, we achieved. We got our message out there, especially with what Sacha Baron Cohen's character was trying to achieve, right? He didn't care if he went to jail for what he believed in. And well, he got his point of view out, even if the media painted him in the wrong light. We know that history kind of looks upon him fondly, in a sense. Yeah. And so is that kind of what you're trying to get at, where it's like a little bit, characters kind of I think it's just a fall to achieve their goal?
I think it's just overall kind of just like the movie-esque-ness of it. And I guess it's like Sorkin always does such a good job of drawing the line between like what is real and what is not, while still keeping it a movie. Like that's the thing, is that there was so much of Social Network that just plainly didn't happen, but they are dramatically added in order to kind of like add like certain motivations to keep the story going. This is the one where, and maybe it was because of the cluttered nature, I started to see like the cracks between like which parts of these were like sort of based on real life and which ones were just like completely dramatized for the sake of the movie. And despite this being a really, really good sappy Hollywood ending, it very much was just like, okay, this is just a very easy physical way to kind of show off the theme. And it was a little distracting as far as like probably how the actual verdict went in my head. Like those two versions are kind of just clashing a little bit.
Yeah. So there's an expression that I've known a lot of people to say, whether it's my creative friends, family members, acquaintances, they'll be like, yeah, I watched a good movie last night. And then they'll be like, but it was like a movie. You know, I feel like he has that like Hollywood twinge on his, that like, I feel like we've thanks to streaming services, there's been a bunch of different voices being allowed to heard. So I feel like there's more realism, even in the things that are a little bit far out in the way that like characters interact on a more human level and less of a written way. And I feel like this definitely had that, especially with the ending scene where they all stand up in the courtroom and they clap. And you know, like the judge is screaming and going crazy. That's such like a not Disney-ified moment, but it has that like movie moment. And so are you saying it kind of takes away from the characters?
A little bit.
I've noticed
a little bit.
But I've only seen 3 of his films.
Right.
So
A little bit, because the problem is that my brain is doing that thing where I'm like, oh man, that's awesome. This character is so cool. And then my brain is also doing that thing where it's like, oh, it's Eddie Redmayne and he's doing a really, really freaking scarily good American accent. And he's saying Sorkin monologue. And my brain is kind of picking that apart. And I'm like, oh, that means the illusion is being broken. What's wrong? Like, I don't know. I guess I'm just getting past it based on the fact that this is so play-esque. Like, this does feel very much like watching a play. And so that's how I'm like kind of like able to put the pieces back together in my head. And the problem is that there are so many characters that not necessarily all of them get something to do. Like the poor last 2 members of the 7, like played by Noah Robbins and Daniel Flaherty. What was it? Like Lee Weiner and John Froines, those guys, they were literally just there to crack one-liners. And I'm like, okay. So you two were like, one of
them was literally just a plot device for the undercover FBI agent to sort of work her way into the mix there. But what I will say is I agree, man. He is very play-esque. I think sometimes it really works, but I think in other times it kind of can take away from it. Like, for example, imagine if like what Tarantino was trying to do with like Inglourious Bastards or Django Unchained was like more play-esque, more Sorkin-esque. I think it would have come off as like, you know, some people already say those are disrespectful movies, but even more disrespectful than it kind of already might have been, because at least with Tarantino, like Brad Pitt's character, he's super comical and super exaggerated, but he has his moments where he's like a real person as well. And these do feel like very movie characters. It wasn't a gripe of mine, but I can see where you're going with that.
Okay, well, first off, only because you're kind of comparing apples and oranges there. Like with Tarantino and Sorkin, their intentions, obviously, with their films are actually very different. And the fact of the matter is that Tarantino's movies are just like not structured like regular movies. Like the problem is that Tarantino makes his movies knowing that they are movies. He knows that they are like fictional and that they are not real. And that's what kind of allows him for like the more gratified moments. Aaron Sorkin makes his movies now that are primarily based on real figures. So,
right, and that's what I'm trying to say. Imagine if Tarantino was trying to, you know, talk about like a social issue that we have here from the lens of Trial of the Chicago 7, but he, you know, wasn't being Tarantino for once. I think
I was about to say, try to get that day happening.
But listen, here's what I'm trying to say. All right, the reason why I went to Tarantino is because I feel like he can get away with talking about the subject matter in Django Unchained and, you know, Inglourious Bastards in the way that he does, because he's established that style. And I'm not saying that Sorkin hasn't established a style. I've only seen 3 films. I do notice a style across those 3 films, but I think one is kind of similar to the other in the sense that trying to talk about this super subject matter that is so politically relevant to today and has all these comparisons and then throwing these movie moments in, I think it does kind of water it down a bit. Whereas it feels like a guy like Tarantino knows his lane a little more in that regard. I respect Sorkin. I mean, look, this case got forgotten. It's very culturally relevant now. It's cool that he brought it back to the light because I think it's something that people should know about. But you're right. It does feel like a movie. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And I just think his style, although it didn't bother me in regards to this film, because I think just giving this a platform again in so long, like I had never heard the name Bobby Seale. They didn't teach me that in school. I didn't know about this. 69 Watergate. That's what I learned. And we moved on, you know, but I do hear what you're saying. I'm basically saying I agree with you. And that's why I agree with you.
Okay. I was about to say that was a very long and detailed explanation, but
we get analytical on this show, man.
No, but I'm glad that you brought that up, because my whole thing is that I did very much enjoy this movie. I don't want that to take away. Those are just like certain like little things that I was noticing. I was getting the nitpicks out of the way early because you mentioned the cast. And now I just kind of want to have fun for the rest of this episode. I want to talk about the cast and I want to talk about this movie's Oscars potentials, because we are going to be hearing a lot more about this movie coming closer to Oscar time. So the cast, this is a big cast. Oh man. Like I said, the main 7 themselves are portrayed by Eddie Redmayne as Tom Hayden, Sacha Baron Cohen as Abbie Hoffman, Jeremy Strong as Jerry Rubin. I was about to say that works. Alex Sharp as Renny Davis, John Carroll Lynch, very big character actor, all pretty much confirmed as the Zodiac Killer in Zodiac, as David Dellinger. Noah Robbins and Daniel Flaherty as Lee Weiner and John Froines, who were just kind of there. Then you've got their defense portrayed by Mark Rylance and Ben Shankman. Then you've got the prosecutors who are brought in at the beginning by Nixon's new Attorney General, right? Yeah, Attorney General.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, in order to prosecute the case. And those guys are played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt and J.C. McKenzie. The new Attorney Defense General is John Dolman. The judge, the incredibly senile judge, is Frank Langella, Judge Julius Hoffman. And then in a last-second save, in like the last 10 minutes of the movie, Michael Keaton comes in as former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and he steals the movie. Oh, man. I wish he had more screen time because he would be who I nominate. But just so you know, as far as who I have in for this movie, in order to determine which ones I think will be nominated, I have Eddie Redmayne and Sacha Baron Cohen. I think they're both going to run co-lead. I think if somebody gets it, it'll be Sacha Baron Cohen because he hasn't gotten an Oscar nomination in a while, and this would be the perfect year to get it. For supporting, I have to potentially be nominated. I have 3 being nominated. I have Jeremy Strong as Jeremy Rubin. I have Mark Rylance as William Kunstler, the lawyer. And I have Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Bobby Seale, who, of course, I criminally forgot to mention above, was the 8th member who was brought in on a previous charge that had nothing to do with him protesting in Chicago. He was the 8th member. He, as he stated multiple times throughout the film, he was not associated with the 7 in any way. And we also followed the course of what happens to him throughout the movie. Of course, he being the 2 TV stars that I mentioned before, being him and Jeremy Strong. Jeremy Strong obviously hitting it big. Both of them winning Emmys previously this past season. Jeremy Strong for his performance in Succession Season 2. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II for his performance as Dr. Manhattan and Watchmen. And yeah, it's a lot of people in this movie. And they're all great. I don't think there's a single bad performance in this entire movie.
No, the characters really worked. And, I kind of wanted to highlight specifically Sacha Baron Cohen because, geez, this guy has range. I mean, I think a lot of people our age would know him for like Borat, early high school / late middle school days is when he was running amok with those crazy films. And then he comes out and he does like Hugo, and it's a complete like tonal shift. And he's just showing you like, dude, I'm an actor. I take on roles, and this is what we do. We play characters. I can play one completely right-wing character, right fielded character, sorry. And then one completely left fielded character in Borat. And then clearly the character he plays in this film, who are 2 completely different people. And the fact that like, I didn't see him as Borat. I just saw him as this incredible performer in this film. I was very, very impressed by his performance. He actually might be my favorite performance out of all the great performances in this film, with the judge being right behind him because he was a delight. Yeah, he was. It's honestly sad. I think I mentioned this in my review, is that it's going to be criminally underrated how no one's going to talk about Frank Langella because the character he plays is just so blatantly evil, unintentionally. Like you almost feel bad for like this guy is like just like super old and just like has no comprehension of today's world. And I think it's a very, very specific choice that you never see the judge outside of that courtroom. You only ever see him like come out of the back like a vampire. And as for like Sacha Baron Cohen, yeah, he is one of the best performances of this year easily. It's weird because even though I guess he's a lead character, again, it's very confusing with how screen time is allotted to these guys, but I had him in supporting. And here's the thing about Sacha. I liked him a lot in this movie. I thought it was really good. I was a little iffy on his accent at times, but I was like, okay, here's the thing about him. I know that he's capable of this range. Like I've seen him give this type of range before, so this wasn't as shocking. What was shocking was seeing shrimpy little Eddie Redmayne, Newt Scamander from the Fantastic Beasts movies, give, oh my God, to me, the performance that carried this movie. Like the movie didn't, it's funny because it tricked me. It did start with him, but then it covered so much within that opening time span, from the various montages of them stating that they were going to go to Chicago to the prosecutors being brought into the office. By the time they got back to him, it's like, whoa, it's already been like 20 minutes of like this 2-hour and 10-minute movie. But the way that we follow him and the way that like he's kind of like the one that's remaining like so like civilly obedient in a way, like to the point where the judge even makes a point to tell him that he's the only one that's like behaved civilly throughout, because the rest of them are pranksters. And like specifically Abbie and Jerry are going out of their way to like show off. They come in judges' robes one day. They're actively mocking the judge in like the opening scene, which is understandably so because the judge can't even get their names right. The trial gets so bad that it drives David Dellinger, portrayed by John Carroll Lynch, to actually finally punch someone. And he's like actively stated that he's the Boy Scout throughout. Like, I like the dynamics that he draws between these guys, but Eddie Redmayne, man, he just carries it throughout. And it so shocked me because the biggest thing that I knew him for were he won his Oscar. Ironically enough, he stole Michael Keaton's Oscar back in 2014.
Michael Keaton should have won for Birdman, and Eddie Redmayne ends up winning as Stephen Hawking in Theory of Everything. Easy win if you ask me. It's easy to win an Oscar for a biopic. Then 1 year later, he's in the Wachowski's movie Jupiter Ascending in one of the most hilariously comically over-the-top performances ever. Then he gets the Fantastic Beasts movies, which I guess make money, but they're terrible movies. And now he's doing this, and I'm like, oh my God, Eddie Redmayne is actually capable of playing a real person. And weirdly, of all the Brits that this movie has, and this movie has a lot of Brits in it, I think he does the best American accent out of all of them, easily. So,
yeah, this is my first introduction to him actually on in film and stuff. And I didn't. If you wouldn't have told me now he was British, I wouldn't have known. So
you skipped the Fantastic Beasts movies.
Yeah, you
made the right call. That's what I'm trying to say. You made the right call.
I'm not a fan of J.K. Rowling's work. It's no disrespect. It's just not for me. That's a different podcast for a different day. I see the merit in her work. It's just not for me. But
man,
he was awesome.
I see a third debate in our future.
Well, I don't know too much about it either. I read the first 2 books when I was a little kid. I saw the first movie, but then for some reason I never kept going. It is what it is. That's life. You grow and you phase out of things. But yeah, no, his character was I didn't feel as impacted by him as you, and here's why. Because I feel like he didn't come to life until that 3rd act, and he was just sort of like a way to create tension within the 7 throughout the entirety of it. And sure, we got to see him a little bit in the flashbacks. He covered up, right? He got arrested, taking the air out of the tire so that his I'll call him confidant could escape and get back to his girlfriend without her knowing that he was at the protest or whatever they were calling it. But I still just kind of felt like he had to do that to progress the story, and it didn't really like impress me until the 3rd act. But that's why I kind of went with Sacha Baron Cohen over him, just because I felt like I got more growth out of that character throughout the entirety of it. Not saying he was like terrible. Like I said, I thought these were all pretty good performances, but I don't know. He just didn't, out of all the people who left me thinking, right, when I was at work, just to sort of get back to my original effect this film had on me, right? I spent all day thinking about it. He wasn't really too much of what I was thinking about, to be honest with you.
Interesting. Well, let's move to the supporting cast, because the supporting cast to me is even more interesting because, again, this movie really is a true ensemble as far as the rest of the players we have here are. So, like I said, we mentioned Mark Rylance as the lawyer, and even though we chuckled at his name, this guy was the rock that these guys had throughout this trial. Like, oh man, it's funny because I've seen Mark Rylance coming up in a couple things. Like I said, came out in Bridge of Spies in 2015. Then he's got Dunkirk in 2017, Ready Player One in 2018. Which he's terrific in both of those movies. I would make an argument to say that he's the best part of both of those movies. And now he's doing this. And I'm like, wow, okay. He was just pulling out all the stops here. He knows exactly the type of reactions to have throughout this dialogue. His American accent is a little touchy, but it doesn't matter because he's just so on point with everything that he says. His monologues, he's like the perfect combination of Martin Sheen and Jeff Daniels characters from The West Wing and The Newsroom, respectively. He's got that fatherly edge, but he's also got that really cold nature stare that will break you down if he has to. The way that he does to Redmayne in when he's interrogating him to see if he can go on the stand. Then you've got Jeremy Strong as Jeremy Rubin. Like I said, another star fresh off a big TV show. He was previously on Succession on HBO, which he is terrific on as Kendall. And the interesting thing about him is that I saw him come on and I'm like, okay, are they just going to have him do Kendall for this show? Because I could very easily see Kendall fitting in. And as it turns out, that's not at all what they did. They gave him a big ass froofy afro. They gave him a big beard. And they just had him literally play a cartoon character. Oh man, he had this wacko accent. I've never heard of it before. I didn't know if it was Midwestern, Southern, or some weird combination of that Fargo accent. He was absolutely hilarious. And I honestly might put him in. I'm not sure. And then, of course, to me, it's so weird. But I think that even though think
you liked him,
Jeremy Strong, yeah.
Okay.
You didn't?
I mean, he wasn't terrible. I just kind of felt like it wasn't anything that kind of was wowing me more than the more standout roles that we spoke about already.
Well, I mean, it's weird because he's not exactly supposed to be wowie. He's supposed to be just a jokey supporting character. And I guess if anything, the whole thing is his arc is which is actually something that I wanted to bring up later on.
I guess I just felt that. Well, we should bring it up now while we're talking about him, right?
Well, no, this is just a completely non sequitur off the point. But I was gonna say what was up with that attempted rape scene at the rally, and which kind of weirdly enough, felt like one of those manufactured moments just there to give Jeremy Strong something to do in the moment.
Yeah, that scene was, I think, problematic for the film, but
Yeah.
I understood the sentiment behind it, just to show, just like the villainy and whatnot. I get it, but with the frat boys and whatnot, the people who sort of stood up for the man in that regard. But I don't know, his character just to me didn't feel special. I don't know, but hey, this movie seems like it's going to divide a lot of people on the way they feel about a lot of different aspects of it, and that's
Yeah.
okay. He wasn't terrible. Like, no one in this movie was terrible. We'll get to my score later on. I
Yeah, I'm going to
imagine
be
it's going to be
interested in
quite
that.
high.
I'm going to be interested in that.
But yeah, no, keep going. I just kind of had to interject there because
yeah,
I just had to.
Okay. We talked about the judge, obviously. A couple of the other supporting characters kind of reeked of just being supporting characters for supporting character's sake. Like the Alex Sharp character, he kind of like only had so much to do. John Carroll Lynch, they gave him like just enough to do, like specifically with the punch in the end. I already talked about like the two jokey other ones. But to me now, real quick, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I thought was fine just for this movie. I think they used him exactly the way that they needed to. It wasn't anything big. It wasn't anything grandiose. It was just like a regular everyday man role that was given a thankless job.
Yeah, I mean, he had like that sort of change of heart moment where he stands up with them in protest, even though he did his job the way that his superiors wanted him to. He sort of showed that he wasn't about it, and that's cool and all. And it's like, I guess, sort of a heartwarming moment for how some people might view this through that lens. But to me, I was, as I have been with most of the Joseph Gordon-Levitt performances that I've seen this year, left a little disappointed and left feeling like, even though it wasn't the key role of this film, right? He wasn't like the biggest important role. I think he was introduced in a very misleading way. I think you kind of thought you were going to be following him from the start, and I thought he was very
deceiving.
Yeah, I thought he was very gripping out the gates, and so I think that's kind of why I sort of have a bad taste in my mouth again. Like, I really like this film, but just for the sake of like being critical of it because it's not perfect, I felt like he was a little mismanaged in the script and the writing, and he didn't really bring much to the table outside of like that initial when you met him performance, and then of course that change of heart moment at the end.
Would have been
an
an interesting
long film, and it just didn't. He didn't grip me as much as I would have wanted, to be honest.
Would have been an interesting take, definitely, if we were following him throughout the whole movie. That would have been
the clash of ideals,
right?
That
would have been interesting if he was the main character and then the seven are like the supporting characters, almost presented as the antagonist. Talk about a 180. That's the way that I thought the movie was going to go. And then I'm like, whoa. And then it like kind of sidled back into like mainstream ensemble territory. And I was like, oh, okay. But you had me going there for a movie. I was like, whoa, Sorkin's about to take another dark turn, because that weirdly enough is where I think he thrives. Like Molly's Game just had that underlying sense of darkness. Social Network, that was like all throughout the movie. Like I honestly think he needs to do more of those movies. And then let's move to me, the MVP of the movie. I think Eddie Redmayne gives the best performance in this movie, but I think that this guy stole the scene. And as far as if and probably when he wins the best supporting actor Oscar for this, I will not at all be surprised. That's Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, Black Manta, Dr. Manhattan himself, now known as Bobby Seale. Holy shit. Let me tell you something. I could definitely tell that this was the part that Sorkin just did exactly what he needed to, and I completely understand why, given everything that's going on. But you want to talk about contributing once again something that happened to African Americans in this country that was just simply abhorrent, and the fact that it happened in a public space too, it's I don't even know how to describe how I don't even know how to describe how I'm feeling, just as far as like how the film starts with him so optimistic.
In a federal court.
So optimistic. He starts off. He's going there. He's actually going to make a difference. Caught on a bullshit charge that we don't even see. Not even allowed to be bailed out. Forced to stay in jail. And then has to undergo probably the cruelest form of mockery and like obvious like physical restraintment against speech that I think I've ever seen put to screen. Like it's brutal to watch, honestly. And I hate to call it manipulative because that would kind of just be wrong, because like the scene is in and of itself. It's like it's a manipulative scene. You are going to feel a certain way after watching this. It's just impossible not to. But I will definitely say that like I'm like, yeah, that wins him the Oscar right there. Like no question. I don't want to take anything away from his performance because it was a truly spectacular performance. It's the most charming. It's the most charismatic I've ever seen him. Like he does a lot with what I feel like are actually a few lines. Like he doesn't have as many lines in this movie as you think, but he does the absolute most with them that he can. And like you could definitely tell like he's into this for very, very obvious reasons.
Yeah, I can see what you mean by that with the whole manipulative thing, and it's definitely a tough situation. I mean, to me, it's one of those things where I think the screenplay and the performance and just like the Hollywood aspect of it actually complements the history here, whereas in some situations, like we spoke about that big courtroom standing ovation at the end, it takes away from it. So that's why like I see this movie from both sides, and I think ironically enough, that's kind of what they were trying to say. Although with this scene, I think there's a clear one way that if you have a heart, you feel, and I think him just leaning into it and just sort of taking that abuse and just being such like that was such a crazy performance, man, and it felt so real and it was uncomfortable and it made you think. And I think that he really was a big part of that, aside from like history just giving us that. Unfortunately, I think what he did with it in his performance was it was telling. And again, that's why I say like this movie has very, very clear contrast from today and back then, and it's a little scary in both his performance in that moment and in regards to like how, well, it feels like we're still in 1968 in some regards, not to be dramatic or over exaggerate, but I mean, yeah, he was, and not outside of that scene alone too, where he gets gagged and bound in a federal court, which is crazy that actually happened. Had to look that one up afterwards just to blink twice.
I love it. Again, it's like I told you that part was real and you still had to look it up because like that's how much of an impact it had.
You just don't want to believe certain things,
yeah,
right? And
you don't. And then when you find out, it's like, wow, we are truly like the worst as a species.
But yeah, I think he did a really good job of because you didn't really get like you said, they didn't show you any of his pre-existing offenses that they kept coming back to. But I mean, just like really only really saw him in the courtroom, and I really enjoyed his character. This movie's weird because like they are confined to this one space, which isn't overly like it doesn't like grip you more than any other courtroom drama you've seen, right? All courtrooms, they can only look so different is what I'm trying to say. Yet the fact that these guys kind of like took it to a new level with inside a medium that I usually hate, by the way, just so everyone knows, I usually hate anything courtroom. I think it's like the worst way to tell a story. It's just so boring, and there isn't really a show don't tell when it comes to these type of things, which is another reason why I don't like it too much. Like I like bottle films, but not these types of like being stuck in one location forever. But like not knowing any of this stuff about Bobby Seale's character, Yahya's character in Bobby Seale, I was like, damn, he killed it. He made me feel for him.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because I think one of the worst criticisms that I heard over this is, again, the people who came out and said that Sorkin didn't focus enough on what actually happened to Bobby and how he kind of literally just leaves the movie. But two things. One, that is one of the few things that they actually got right from real life, because finally the lawyers approached the judge. I don't know if it was done exactly in the way that it was in the movie, where it's like, dude, you literally just committed an act of blatant racism in front of the court. We need to declare this a mistrial. And the judge is like, are you saying that you've accused me of being... And they all looked at him and they're like, dude, come on. This is 1960 and we're all old. And even we know that was inhumane. And, oh man. And the whole thing, that my take on it, or just overall, just that entire arc, is that kind of, for lack of a better word, the neglect and the fact that that was a secondhand occasion in like a trial that was primarily made of white people. I was like, okay, I actually see where this is going, because this is legitimately saying that us not taking this as seriously as it was is a tremendous problem. And that's kind of how I took it, just as far as how that whole arc went. Now, I think for some of my favorite scenes, because I wanted to go over scenes, because this movie has a lot of scenes in them. And the two, obviously, that came to my mind. One, the Michael Keaton testifying, because Michael Keaton's awesome and stole this movie within like 10 minutes. But that part, to me, even though it was a little obvious, it was just kind of amazing, just like how blatantly ridiculous it got when the judge is like, yeah, we don't have the jury here, so your testimony won't count. And I'm like, oh my God, really? This has to happen? And so that's scene number one. And then scene number two was, I guess, and I'm interested to hear your take on this scene, because this was, I personally really enjoyed the scene, but that just might be like my idiot Sorkin addicted brain, because a lot of people are saying that this scene was like kind of on the nose, kind of like the presentation of the theme, which is when Abbie and Tom get into the argument back at the house where Tom is like, where Abbie's like, yeah, Tom has a problem with me. And Tom is like, do you know why I don't like you? Because in 50 years, you are going to be the only image that we have of the left. Not progression, not education, not healthcare, not anything like that. Just drug addicts, like ridiculous prankster hippies. And he's like, you think I don't care? And he's like, no, I don't think you take it seriously. I think nothing gets past you and your ego. And then they basically get into the fact that Tom is only capable of accidentally writing an objective prepositions, which basically kind of means that like he finds himself higher than everyone else. So like that dichotomy, I know a few people had a problem with that scene, but I really enjoyed it. That was probably my favorite moment in the movie. It's just like the pure presentation of the theme. I'm like, damn. And the fact that this is presented so well in these monologues, this is a brilliant screenwriting, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know who had a problem with it, because I certainly didn't. I thought that that was one of the few things that they had really done a good job of sort of tacking on throughout the entirety of the film and building to, right? Like I said, how I wish with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, when he, does demand that mistrial, or when he does stand up at the end and clap, like, sure, I got to know him a little bit, but I didn't really get to know him enough to the point where, like, for me, the emotional payoff was there outside of just like agreeing with his decision from like a political and historical aspect, I guess, from a human
also just
being
a moral
aspect.
standpoint. Yeah.
Right. But like, if we're talking about characters and story, I didn't feel too compelled by his choice there, because I felt like I hadn't got to know him or his conflicts as much as I, like I said, thought we were gonna. But in regards to these two and their conflict and their, issues with each other throughout the entirety of it, I really felt that moment. And I thought it was pretty, to me, what really made that moment was when, Abbie was sort of talking about the fact that he had read, Tom's readings, and he was aware of who he was as a person, but philosophically, he just wanted to fight for the same thing in a different way. And so that crossroads of like, they're on the same team and there actually is this respect that the other didn't know was there for him. Abbie, had actually, loved Tom's writing and was a fan of his. But the fact that like they're just so invested in this fight that they can't even get unified on it, it showed their passion, and it kind of made their characters even stronger for me. So like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of, Eddie Redmayne's character overall, but Redmayne's character overall, but like he did have good moments. And I think that moment in his back and forth with Sacha's character was a big reason why I think Sacha's character was like the standout performance for me.
All right. We're running low on time here, but I wanted to hit you with 3 rapid fire questions just to see what your response was before we get to final thoughts and star ratings. So, number 1, this movie clearly showed wrongdoing on the part of the cops, but do you think it went far enough?
Yes, because I think it's only escalated since then. So where it was in 68, I think wasn't where it is today if you look at like Portland and stuff. And maybe that's because we have the ability to record every incident on a smartphone right now. And so if you go on Twitter and you're not just sort of in your little hole of comfort, you might see things that are uncomfortable. And I'm seeing a lot of that stuff on my Twitter feed. So, and I think, yeah, I would say yes. But again, it was really a courtroom drama. So that wasn't the point of it.
I agree, definitely. So glad that got your take on that. Number 2, who is your MVP performance of the movie? I'm pretty sure you already said it, but I just want you to clarify it right now.
Yeah, Sacha Baron Cohen, because I was very impressed with him just as an actor. I hadn't really experienced or felt this side of his range, rather, to the extent that I did in this movie. He really pulled me in. And I love the way he sort of, fought for his side of things in this film. He really took that character and ran with it, I felt.
All right. Yeah, mine's a tie between Eddie Redmayne and Yahya Abdul-Mateen. I love Sacha. He's right behind them. And then my last question, who do you think they're going to campaign in what category? So who do you think is going to be nominated? Just so you know, like overall, where it's probably going. I believe that Eddie Redmayne and Sacha Baron Cohen are campaigning lead. And then for who they'll put up for supporting, I think they'll put in at least 4. I'm thinking Jeremy Strong, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Mark Rylance, and Frank Langella are who I think they'll nominate. And I think that of all of them, the 2 that will get in will most likely be Mark Rylance and possibly Jeremy Strong because of his Emmy win. But if not, then it'll be Mark Rylance, because Mark Rylance weirdly enough, hasn't had a nomination since 2015 with Bridge of Spies.
Yeah, I think Kunstler is a shoo-in for sure.
And you use the name. You're like, yes,
hey man,
you had to use the name.
I think Yahya Abdul for all those reasons
Yahya
you
Abdul,
said.
yeah.
Yeah, Yahya Abdul. I think for the reasons you said, Eddie Redmayne, but I don't really think that is deserving as well.
Eddie Redmayne's the safe choice. Sacha Baron Cohen would be the surprising choice.
Yeah, and I think
easily any one of them getting nominated.
So those are like my supporting ones right there. And what was the other thing you asked me? Sorry, these Oscars are really overwhelming.
Yeah, I know. Well, for supporting actor, like I said, I think that of the two who will get in, that was right. Yeah, those were the only two that I was saying, because those are really the only things that are up for contention. Like, this movie will get nominated for picture, depending on who the nominees are for director. This could be up for that. This will definitely be up for original screenplay, and this will be up for like a few other things like costumes and stuff like that. But
I need to ask you about this. I feel like Sacha Baron Cohen should be a shoo-in. But then I'm still new to this world, and I saw what they did to Adam Sandler last year, and I feel like they don't like him because of Borat and those types of films.
That's a thing to consider. That is a thing to consider. But the one thing I will say to keep in mind is that somehow, against all odds, Borat got an original screenplay, an adapted screenplay nomination.
Really?
Sorry, when it came out. Yes, I am not kidding. Sacha
in,
Baron Cohen, he won the Golden Globe, and I think he came like this. I want to say he got a SAG award, but I'm not sure. So, like I said, what I will say is that even though the Oscars are traditionally boring and annoying, the race to the Oscars is always interesting, and this movie really kind of was the unintentional kickoff. Like I said, I've seen one festival movie. I'm seeing another one on Wednesday. So it'll be interesting to watch this movie's Oscar potential overall as we get closer. So, Chris, as always, this is a great episode.
Well, I think you said you had a third question?
That was the third question.
Oh, I want to know what your take on the police violence was. I have a few minutes.
The police violence.
I appreciate you being concerning on my schedule, but
yes, it was good for at the time, but again, it goes back to the giddy optimism factor, which is like, it feels like it's an easily solvable question, and it's like, dude, these are still going on today. Like, we literally just had this like not even a couple months ago. So again, one of those points that it's like just kind of hits a little bit too close to home as far as that goes, So that's kind of my thoughts on it. But as for my final thoughts on this movie, look, it may have sounded like I brought up a lot of negative points, but this movie's a really good movie. It's an entertaining movie, which is more that can be said for a lot of the movies that have come out this year. It's right on Netflix, so it's super convenient to watch if you like just really fast-paced monologues, a lot of interesting characters, and some absolutely incredible performances. And also, if you've just been missing a good courtroom drama, since A Few Good Men could actually be viewed in theaters all of 28 years ago, which is insane that it's been that long since that movie, but it's still as fresh on everybody's minds. This movie, I will say right now, is my favorite movie of the year. It is not a perfect movie. It is not even close to being in Aaron Sorkin's top tier. I'd put this at like 6 in his overall canon of work, but I'm still giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And that should say something about Sorkin. The fact that that's kind of like, this is like lower tier for him, and it's still freaking amazing.
Dude, I'm still just trying to learn from you, man. I don't know how you do it, but yeah, I agree with all of what you just said. I can't speak to the Sorkin 6 out of 10 thing, of course. I've only seen a few films of his, but what I can say is this is the least impressed I've been out of the few pieces of work of his that I've been exposed to.
Definitely no Social Network.
Yeah, that's a tough,
that's a tough egg to crack, but still, it's no Social Network, especially since this is 10 years after Social Network. It's not a spiritual successor in any way, but
yeah, my gut is telling me this is a 4 out of 5, so I'm gonna go with that because I think we got to know the characters a little less than we got to hear.
I'll admit 2020 is definitely giving this a push, but I still do think this is a fantastic movie. So people, once again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Talkin TV podcast. I'm Dom. That's Chris. Movie nerd, TV nerd. We have a YouTube channel. It's called Talkin TV. It'd be awesome if you guys could subscribe. Click the subscribe button, click the like button, click the bell next to it. That way you get notified every time we put up new content on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We're having a big event this month called Shocktober. It's coming Friday. We're watching Tucker and Dale versus Evil on AJ of AJ Reacts 2's channel. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Follow us on our Facebooks and Instagram at Talkin TV or at Talkin TV Podcast. And as always, people, watch more fucking movies. We'll see you next time.